Now we're going to welcome to stage business wife number one, Beena, fantastic entrepreneur, award-winning entrepreneur of carbon capture. Thank you, Beena.
Thank you.
Oh, woo, look at that, woo. So, Beena, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your journey with us today. So I'd like to kind of just maybe start at the back and tell me where you got the inspiration to become a founder and how you got to carbon capture.
There's a couple of stories in there, I think, but I come from an entrepreneurial family, and many people from my culture came here, or parents came here, and they struggled to find jobs because they didn't quite fit into a lot of these spaces, maybe from an educational background. The education didn't quite marry up with the jobs that were available here. So when my father came here in the 1960s, he decided that the one option would be for him to set up his own business. And actually he worked in the Italian rag trade. He set up his factories in London, and that's really where he made his money. And I think I probably had that in me. My father unfortunately passed away when I was only 6 months old. So I never really saw that entrepreneurial journey. I heard about the entrepreneurial journey, but I always thought it was always almost like a dream. So I think internally I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know how. And I didn't have the inspiration in front of me to do it. And then I think the second part of that journey was really when I worked. So I worked in the oil and gas industry 25 years ago. I started, and my first posting, some of you already know, was to Nigeria. And one of the things that surprised me about Nigeria is that baptism of fire, I call it. I was 21 years old, and one of the things that really inspired me about Nigerians was that every single Nigerian, and I worked on a site with 6,000 predominantly men, and a lot of those were local Nigerians. And one of the things that I noticed with every single Nigerian that I worked with was every single one of them was an entrepreneur in some which way or form. So you would have an engineer, but also said, do you want to buy some peanuts? I've got some peanuts in my pocket. And that used to really, it was actually quite inspiring. And I thought there didn't seem to be anything that these people couldn't do. And I went back and I thought, we live such a privileged life in the UK, and we don't make the most of the opportunities. So that was really the second thing that inspired me. And then third thing was what most people do is they kind of fall into it. And then once they fall into it, they can't get out of it. And that's really what happened to me. I moved up to Aberdeen 6.5 years ago, decided I didn't want to work for a big corporate anymore, and started looking at doing some volunteering work, fell into the net zero climate change space, came to the realization that there's so much opportunity in this space because we've got so far to go, and realized that actually technology was one of these areas that we needed to enhance and build on in order to get us to where we needed to be as far as net zero was concerned. And that's when I started doing some research and started looking at the different technologies that are out there. So since then, I've set up a few businesses, all in similar space, but carbon capture has been the latest.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I remember you shared one story of, I think on the last Startup Grand event. You know, somehow, again, going back to what we raised with Rajesh, for immigrants to do business, they're always clouded with, oh, this market is saturated. How do you came across that carbon capture stuff? Was it accidental or coincidental or intentional?
You don't make them easy for me, do you, Frank? It was a combination of a number of things, to be honest. So my third business was a company which was a biotechnical business. It was taking food waste and creating a full circular economy. And I was approached by somebody to support that. So having proven myself in the entrepreneurial space and having worked with a number of people, they recognized that actually this could be a really good co-founder. So my co-founder approached me and said, I've got this business. It's going really well in Abu Dhabi. We're setting it up in France, but we want to do it in the UK, and you'll be the perfect person to head it up. So when I went and did this, I found myself having to learn very, very quickly. But when I put myself in front of investors in Silicon Valley, and that business had 4 technologies in it that existed. I didn't invent them. They existed. We were just bringing them together in a very unique way to create a circular food economy. Every investor I spoke to said, tell me about the carbon capture. And I didn't know anything about the carbon capture at this point. And this was only, coming up to 2 years now, so it wasn't that long ago. And I thought, I don't actually know anything about the carbon capture. But for the next 3 to 4 months, every investor we spoke to was, tell us about the carbon capture. Come back to us when you've developed the carbon capture technology. Thought, we're going to have to push this out. And actually, we'd only done a little bit of research on what technologies were available. Recognized that the one technology that we had selected out of the University of Sheffield was probably the most carbon efficient, energy efficient, smallest carbon capture technology on the planet, and we had to invest in it, and we had to scale it out. So we went very quickly from technology ready level, for those of you that are engineers in the room, TRL2 to TRL7 within a year, wow, which is extremely quick. Wow. And that was done really just based on perseverance and the market needed it. So I think with entrepreneurship, the focus really is, what does the market need? What does it desire? Because quite often we can decide, I want to do this because I enjoy it, or I want to do this, but the reason why a lot of entrepreneurs fail is because there isn't a market for it, or we don't market ourselves well enough for it. So I do think, and I have to add as well, for somebody, by the way, that doesn't come from a technical background, I'm not technical, I'm not an engineer. In fact, my background is psychology. That's what I did for the oil and gas industry. So also make it very clear that just because you're not technical or you don't have an engineering background doesn't mean that you can't do something technical in your business. I'm not the technical person in the business. That's what I have technical people for, but I am the face of the business. And I think a lot of the time we forget that entrepreneurship and building a brand, building a business is about building a brand. And most people will say to me, you are the brand, you're there, you're traveling, you're speaking to different communities, speaking to different industries. I don't have a clue about well, I do have a clue about the technology, but you know, I only go to a certain level. And I think because I can talk, I think Rajesh mentioned, you know, people, we're in the people, entrepreneurs are in the people business first and foremost. Before we start thinking about the solutions that we've got, we're in the people business. And what we need to do is look at the problems. And for our clients, we need to tick as many of those boxes as we possibly can. The more we tick, the more business we will earn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. So, being a female founder and from an ethic background, what's been the biggest challenge you've faced to date in your entrepreneurial journey? And I would like to also flip it and say, what has been the most proudest moment in that journey?
So, although I do consider myself ethnic minority, I try not to use the word minority, because I think as soon as you attach the word minority, there are all sorts of connotations that come with it, and I don't like to think of myself as a minority. But I am quite unique in the sense that I was born in the UK. I was brought up in the UK. So people probably take to me better than they would somebody who has an accent. So I quite often get told, oh, you don't speak with an accent. Oh, you speak quite good English. Yes, I came from a very affluent area of North London. I didn't grow up affluent, but I came from a very affluent area, so I speak very well. But one of my biggest challenges has been around that, actually. People just assume that before even speaking to me, before hearing my voice, they already make assumptions. And I go places, I'll give you an example. I was at a conference last week in Amsterdam, and I was a speaker at the conference. So day 2, I was speaking. I met a lot of people on day 1. And the attitude towards people, it's almost like they don't want to talk to the ethnic person in the room, because they don't know if they're going to have a decent conversation with that person, because they don't know if that person can speak proper English. So I felt that almost immediately from a lot of the people in the room, and you know, they would typically gather in their own little groups. Yeah. And it was only until day 2, first thing in the morning, I presented. And that's when the comments came, oh my God, you speak really well. What did you expect? Yeah. You know, so that has probably been my biggest challenge, being judged before I've even opened my mouth. Yeah. And also, one of the biggest challenges I've had has been in Aberdeen. And I hate to say it, but sometimes I feel like we've been transported back to the 1980s, some of the attitudes that I get here. And I'm not talking about Aberdeen in general. I'm talking specifically about the industry I come from. There are no women that do what I do, full stop. So in order for people to take to me, it takes quite a bit. But the other thing that I find as well is I tick a lot of boxes for, I sit on a lot of panels in the energy industry, I'm absolutely mortified that there are not more women, not more people from different diverse backgrounds on these panels. But sometimes I feel like I get selected because I tick, oh, you're a female, oh, you're a person of colour. And I get told it a lot. So those have been my biggest challenges. I think just overcoming that, once you're over that, sort of, then it's fine. But the wins, the big wins for me have been really a bit more personal. So getting over the fact that I can put myself out there just because I look different or I sound different or I feel different, it doesn't mean that I can't be on par with anybody else. And I think those barriers are more psychological, and once you pass those, once you can get over those, so I put myself out there, my business has been going for 13 months. I've achieved in 13 months what most businesses can't do in 13 years. So when I put myself out there, I put myself out there in the press. I mean, some of you may have seen, December 2022, I put a press release out. Nobody really knew me before then. I put a press release out saying that I was going to achieve 1 billion in revenue over 10 years. Guess how much criticism I got? Guess how many enemies I made? People who I've never even met before. So I rustled a lot of feathers. So yes, that was a challenge, but at the same time, it was my biggest win because I realized that, you know what, it doesn't matter what I do, whether I put myself out there or not, it's never going to please people. So therefore, I'm going to do what's right for me and what's right for my business. Now, I put that press release out on the 5th of December 2022. On the 6th of December 2022, my Hong Kong investor called me up and said, I want to invest. So at the end of the day, who won? Yeah. So I think for me that probably a message to all is put yourself out there, step outside of your comfort zone. In fact, don't even think of it as a comfort zone. Just do what you would normally do. Try not to let others hinder how you think and feel about, ultimately if it's good for you and it's good for your business, then the saying goes to hell with what everybody thinks. And everybody's going to have an opinion. I can guarantee you, when you're a nobody, nobody wants to know. Once you start climbing that ladder, every single person around you will have an opinion on what you should be doing, what you should be wearing, what you should be saying, you name it, they've got an opinion. So it's always going to happen. And I think certainly with minority groups, we tend not to put ourselves out there because we stand out. And I'll give you an example. Only 3 weeks ago, middle of December, I went to a chamber, Aberdeen Chamber business breakfast. There was 250 people. And I was delighted to see that there was actually quite a lot of women. But out of 250 people in Aberdeen for a business breakfast made up of the Chamber of Commerce, I was the only person that wasn't white. And that was the first time in my life that I felt uncomfortable. And that's not happened before, but I quickly pulled myself out of it. And I thought, at least there's one.
And also, I wouldn't say massive, huge success for women in new technology, in energy. It was fantastic to see your room there, really promoting diversity and inclusion in the energy sector. So, well with me. And also a bit personal, just experience for yourself is, we talk about our communities, but sometimes, and you might feel the same as me, I kind of feel like I'm in the middle.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say,
yeah, and I'm glad you can say it and be honest and open, but sometimes I feel we're not accepted by our own culture, or neither. So sometimes we've got to really balance that approach, haven't we? But it is key about people by people. Once they get to know you, get to understand you, you find that you build bridges and break down barriers. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. And that's one of the things, having been born and brought up in the UK, I've never really been accepted by my own community because I'm too English. Or I'm too white. And then also on the other side, I've never really been accepted. But one thing I will say, when I walk into a room, it's very rare that I notice now that I might be the only woman, or because I'm so used to it. Other people will pick up on it, but I don't. And I think that's one of the things we have to stop doing, is saying, stop looking at how we're different. Let's look at the similarities. Focus on the similarities and the positives rather than the differences.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I was growing up, my name was Nurpal, but as soon as I went to school, everyone called me Nick, and it stuck because it was kind of a name. So yeah, I get it, but you have to try and fit in, and that's what it's about sometimes. So thank you for that, Franklin.
Yeah, I'm already in cloud nine. Just move on what you guys say. Yeah, but again, my mind kept going back. If this is the world we find ourselves, how do we do this diversity stuff? And I'm of the opinion, I'm liking what Innovator is doing now, right? It's not so that for ourselves, it's our unborn children, right? How do we build these things off such a way that not to shout over to the industry, right? How do we make the industry see it not because of our color, but because of innovation that we're bringing to the table? And I'll tell you, I read a book, but the best book on innovation, that is 5 elements of innovation, and it's diversity. And diversity is not because of our color, of what we are bringing to the table. How do we achieve that?
So there's loads of different ways that we can achieve it. Certainly in business, we have to make sure that we've got policies that are inclusive. We have to destigmatize some things around cultures, around, especially communities when they're celebrating certain events in their own cultures. We have to destigmatize some of these things, destigmatize menopause to be more inclusive of women, for example. So policies are really important, but it's also really important to make sure in your organization that you are fostering an inclusive community within your own business. And that is by ensuring that we are our recruitment processes are fair, ensuring that we're looking at things like the difference in pay, the difference in opportunity, leadership, etc. But the other way that we do that is by putting people like me, and as much as I hate it, you might disagree, as much as I hate it, I have had to put myself out there because I recognize that it inspires others to do the same. And I don't think enough of us do that. We get to a certain level and then we start to we go on a downward, oh, well, I'm there and I'm doing my thing and I'm making my money but it's really important that people like us come to the forefront, not at events like this. I'm talking about where we're not represented, so that others can see, well, if she can do it, then other people can do it too. Then we shouldn't be biased towards. And the third and final thing I have to say is allyship. Find those people in those communities that are not your own that are allies. And one example I give you is back in September, we had an event here. It was Offshore Europe. I don't know if you remember the Offshore Europe conference. And we had something like 60,000. I don't know where they put 60,000 people in Aberdeen, but apparently there were about six. None of them could get taxis, by the way, just saying. So we had about 60,000 people here. And in the morning, there was a breakfast. With 500 people. This was the start of the week of Offshore Europe, and people had come from all over the world, and there was a breakfast. And that breakfast had 500 people at it. It was run by the Chamber of Commerce, and 500 people in it. And the Chamber of Commerce did the introduction, and then the next thing that happened is one by one he called up somebody from a different company, Baker Hughes, whatever it is. They came, they did their 5-10 minutes of what they were doing in the energy transition and what they were doing differently, and then they sat down on the panel. Once you had 5 people on this panel, they opened it up to questions, and the first hand went up. And the first question was, how can we talk about the future when the opening panel of Offshore Europe 2023 has 5 white middle-aged men on it? Boom. And the person that asked that question was a middle-aged white man. So I remember everyone looking at me saying, oh my God, it wasn't you for the first time ever. I was like, hallelujah. But then the second question was, there's a panel that's taking place in the afternoon, which is a diversity panel. It would be really great if all 5 of you could attend that panel, because I think you need to learn something. And instead of saying, actually, you know what, you're right, which would have been the best response, you're right, we made a mistake this time. It was excuse after excuse. Oh, but we've got these policies, we do this at this company and we do this at that company. And it just got worse, and you just sit down and stop talking. You're not going to be able to answer this question. So that's what we need allies. And that is the third piece of that puzzle. If we can get allies like you, Paul, who is here today speaking, we need people like you. No offense, middle-aged white man. But we need people like you batting for our corner, because otherwise it's just us saying the same old thing, and we're told, oh, here she goes again, banging on about colour, banging on about being a woman, and that it's not working. History has told us it's not working for us, so we need more of you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perfect answer, because we always think that, oh, let's get to those spaces just because we're black, we're minority. Until when I read that book, that a strong organization has to have diverse opinions, and that's what you have said. What's your Nick?
Yeah, so I'm going to be a bit rogue now and go off piece here. Not question on this, Franklin. So, who's been your biggest inspiration?
I think actually and I think we might have touched this question last time, but actually I think my biggest inspiration has actually been my husband. And I tell you why, and my kids. So I've got 2 boys, very grown-up boys, and I've been surrounded by men, and actually they have taught me how women should be treated and what it actually means to have that diverse type of thing. So my husband works for BP. We always say he's the one that does all the dirty oil and gas stuff and I do the cleanup. But the way that he goes about what he does for BP and champions diversity in BP, and I come back, I learn so much from him. And he is that voice of reason in my head. You know, when somebody says something to me, so an example I'll give you is somebody said once to me, you know what, love, if I was you, I'd stick to your spices. And I actually responded to him. I do respond. People think I don't, but I do respond. And I think I responded with something like, he was technical background, and I said, you know what, I could do your job like that, but I bet you couldn't cook a curry better than I could ever. And so he didn't know what to say. So, yeah, exactly. So, you know, sometimes you've got to be able to defend yourself, and he taught me how to defend myself without being rude, without being obnoxious, and without sounding like I was a victim. So by far, he has been my biggest, not just my biggest ally, but my biggest inspiration.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Franklin?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the questions now, and
You got it as well.
I'm just looking at it now. Yeah, again, I'm going to tweak it again. We can't wait for other people to help ourselves, right? How do we help ourselves? You are in the green tech. And one of the things that I've seen that all the big companies, all of that, how do we enter the space? How do we build ourselves into the space? And let me tell you the angle I'm coming from. I read geology, right? So if I knew something as well, why can't I big, just like what Ovatop is doing, or maybe a training session to train people? And sometimes it's not bad. Open up where the opportunities are.
Yeah. There are opportunities, and where there aren't opportunities, you have to make them. And if we look at particularly the net zero space, you know, more than 50% of the technologies that we need have not yet been invented. Just have a think about that. Opportunity, that's a huge amount of opportunity. And I'm not just talking about in energy tech, I'm talking about overall from a net zero perspective. You spoke about blockchain. You know, we can use blockchain in carbon credits. So you and I need to have a conversation. So when I capture...
You can put me in that conversation.
Yes.
We've already got the coin.
Yeah, but being able to trace carbon, you know, it's a huge opportunity. So for every technology that there is, the space I work in, carbon capture, is I am capturing emissions from industry and chimney flue stacks. And they typically, those industries tend to be in disadvantaged areas where there is a large population of ethnic minorities. You know, we talk about levelling up for policies, etc. And actually one of the things I think was spoken about today is, you know, we need to get to a point where we're influencing policy. And I have just spent this today, up until about 4 o'clock, I spent 5 hours working with policymakers in this space. So how do we bring more diverse people into the energy transition? So it is happening, but I'm at that point now where I can be a voice, and we need to get ourselves to that space. But how are we going to do that? Innovation, we keep saying, we keep being told is key. Yet at the same time, there isn't enough support, enough funding behind that innovation. And innovation is just that. It's something new that somebody's never done before. So you can't expect it to follow the same route that every other opportunity has followed. You have to create that journey. I can't even tell you how many times I have to tell people this needs to be done differently because it doesn't work how normal tech works. We need to do something different. And if I even look at things like investment, typically when you raise a seed round in the tech industry, you may be looking at a couple of 100,000. You know, in energy tech, in climate tech, you're looking at millions. You have to change the mindset of investors to say our seed round isn't a couple of 100,000. Our seed round is a couple of million because we need that to get to the next stage. But I think in terms of creating the opportunity, you have to look and you have to see where they are. I've just told you now 50% of the technologies we need to get us to net zero have not yet been invented.
I will go to.
There you go.
There you go.
And that's what you need to, and there are some companies here, you know, I work with some companies in here who are doing some phenomenal things in the space. And I keep saying you need to keep going and you need to keep hammering away because you are needed. It might not necessarily show right now because typically as government, what we'll do is we'll go, we need to get to net zero by 2045 and we'll be fine for another 5 years, 10 years. Then we'll get to 2040 and we'll be like, oh, bleep. We need to do some stuff now. And guess what? The technologies are going to be there because some of you guys may have already been working on them.
Yeah, me come back to you.
What advice would you give any female founder looking to get into carbon capture, green tech, and the tech space?
Yeah, this is a really hard one because I didn't seek to do this, so it's not like there's a pathway that I can say this is the pathway to take. There's opportunity in the sense that, right, what I will say is up until 2 years ago, in fact, probably up until about a year ago, it was probably this time last year when I started being asked to speak at panels, at conferences on the topic. I didn't know the topic that well. It wasn't really something that I came from. I'm not technical, I'm not an engineer, but I knew what people needed to hear. Coming from a psychology background, I knew what people needed to hear to get buy-in. And I'm all about hearts and minds, winning hearts and minds, as opposed to winning people on the technical side. So I made sure that I could learn the things that I needed to get me by. And people used to say, well, I don't know anything about this topic. You'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. And then I had to say that to myself, you'll be fine. And I was fine. And I quite often bring I bring a lot of contentiousness to panels because I challenge the norm. And this is probably why I stand out. But if you think at this time last year, I was not considered an expert in the carbon capture space. Now I am considered a global expert in the carbon capture space because I taught myself it. I found out where the gaps were, where things were missing, where is it that what are the things that people are not talking about that they need to talk about? And I talk about topics that make me look like an expert because nobody else is talking about them. If we talk about carbon capture, utilization, we always see CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, storage. Majority of the CCUS community do not know what the U stands for. And I can vouch for that. I ran a conference last year in Aberdeen, and they asked me to run a workshop on CCUS. And it was questions, about 40 people from the industry, from your BP, Shells, etc. Always CCU, CCUS in their title, CCS in their title. And I asked them the question, what can we use CO2 for? And they went, store it or utilize it to bring more oil up. They didn't know that it goes in virtually every product that we breathe, eat, use, our shampoos, our shower gels, our construction material. It goes in everything, plastics manufacturing. And I thought, so we're looking at CO2 as a waste product and putting it into storage, when actually we should be taking it, it's a commodity, it's a value. So I'm doing something really unique to what they're doing. They're going, carbon capture is a cost, carbon capture, capturing it, compressing it, liquefying it, transporting it, storing it, injecting it, and then monitoring it, we think 1,000 years before it stabilizes at cost, and they're applying a cost mechanism to it. I'm saying I can capture it, and I can sell it, or I can create product and revenue for a business. I'm doing something completely different. So it's the same process of capturing CO2, but I'm doing something completely different. That's the innovative part. Yes, of course, the technology is the best technology in the world, but I'm doing something very innovative to make sure that businesses can make money from a waste product instead of just storing the CO2 to avoid paying their taxes or their carbon tax or whatever it is. So definitely, I think that for women that and people from diverse backgrounds who are looking to move into this space, there is opportunity to educate and train yourself. Remember, net zero is not somewhere we've been before. Somebody has to start talking about these topics and becoming experts. How does somebody like me become an expert globally in a year? Because I've taught myself the stuff. And I also say to the industry, specifically in the industry, you are no longer up against, if I think about my position in oil and gas, now, if you step into this space, you are no longer up against middle-aged white man with 20 years experience. Because guess what? That doesn't exist. So I always say to the industry, if you want to be counted, doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, what your gender is, if you want to be counted, now is the time to do it. Because if you're going to wait 5 years, then yes, you're going to be up against a middle-aged white man with 5 years experience. So if you're going to do it now. And that's my advice. Don't procrastinate because the opportunities are passing you by.
Yeah. So before we round up, there's something I think to balance everything. We've talked about the CCUS side of things. I know not everybody is interested in CCUS side of things, right? So what helped you in your journey? I know sometimes you follow startup going to US, all of those stuff. I think one of the things that affects people who come newly is that they don't go out, right? Yeah. What are those competitions? What help you so that all of them can have a feel of what you are?
Yeah.
I think that should be the last question on water, right?
We can keep going.
It is, she said, yeah. I think definite networking is obviously really important, but not just networking. There are a lot of people who network for the sake of networking. I'm talking about networking for purpose. You know, making sure that you do your due diligence on who's going to be in the room. Are you going to have the opportunity to speak to a particular individual that could potentially serve your purpose from a business perspective or from a personal growth perspective? So everything has to have a purpose. I know a lot of people that network, but there's no purpose behind the network. Am I going to build those connections? Am I going to specifically talk to an individual that I need to speak to who can influence policy, for example? So that's how I've always focused my approach to networking, getting myself out there. Also, stepping outside of that comfort zone, which typically as minority groups, and also women, we don't do. Because I'm not saying there's imposter syndrome, but certainly when we don't fit the mold, we tend not to put ourselves out there because we get noticed. And I get noticed. As a woman, as a person of colour in the industry, everybody knows me because I look different. And the example I give, last year I went to London Tech Week and I was pitching at London Tech Week, and I had something like 170 investors in the room, and there were 10 companies that pitched, 10 Scottish companies. I was the only female and I was the only non-white. Now, almost every single investor approached me, and when they were asked, when we asked them why, they said it was because they couldn't remember what the other 9 did because they were all white men. And that's when I thought, hold on a second, this could work for me. But they all remembered what I did. So they all came and spoke to me. And so you have to use that to your advantage. I cannot stress it enough. It is not a disability. We see it as a disability quite often. It is an advantage. People will remember you because you stand out, because you're different.
Thank you very much. Nick,
Yeah.
back to you.
Thank you much. And on that note, let's give Beena a round of applause. Thank you very much. I'll get you to stay here if that's okay. Yeah?